Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Lassini, and on this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This is episode 80. Thank you so much for being with me. If this is your very first time, I hope you really enjoy it. It's been going on now for over 5 years, and this is the 80th episode. It's a wonderful talk that I have with Coach Peter Cordrey. And before we get started, I just want to say this podcast episode is sponsored by Whoop, the wearable technology that I wear every single day. We will put the discount code in the show notes, and one other, Thorn Health Tech, which are the products that I take to take my performance to the very next level. They're NSF certified for sport, highest quality, potency, and purity on the supplement market today, also in the show notes. So without further ado, let's dive in to today's episode 80.
Well, Coach, where I want to start us off is I read this line one time, and it said, women want to be adored and men want to be admired. And one of the first texts I went back that I was looking at our interactions, you such a kind note to me. It was like our second text. You said, I admired your game for a very long time. And that means a lot to me because I've admired you for a very long time. And that's why I love these settings, because I sometimes know the guest at a deep level, but you and I have a depth in our friendship and relationship that's pretty profound. So first of all, thanks for being here. And second of all, I want to let you know that I admire you as well.
Thanks for having me. No, I'm a total lacrosse rat. So I watch games, and obviously when you were playing at Yale, I'd see this kid 16 just going up and down the field all the time, just playing his heart out, and that's all you could ask from a player is that, if you have 10 more Classinis, you're going to win.
I thought that. So thank you so much. I want to start with a quote that I found from a woodworker, because I know that you're into woodworking. His name is Peter Cordrey. He said, for the longest time, I thought I wanted to make a table that was durable and had so much integrity. What I realized, I actually wanted to be a durable person with integrity. Building a table was just a venue to try to learn those qualities and characteristics for self. Do you feel similarly about your work?
The woodworking, when I tell people I do woodworking, they bring up JC, and who was a carpenter. And there is something about woodworking that is spiritual. There's no question. Like, you're in your shop, and it's solitary when you're in there, and you're doing things, and you're carving away, and you're trying to make something out of wood. And there's a lot of challenges and a lot of mistakes, and kind of like life in general.
Yeah.
And but when you get that finished product, that sense of something solid and something with integrity, no question. I get asked a lot, what do you like to make the most? And I actually like making benches.
Why?
Because there's something about a bench, or just solid, and to me it evokes a team a lot of times, because you're not sitting by yourself, you're sitting with somebody else. And there's a humility, for sitting on the bench. And I've sat on the bench, and I know what it feels like. And it's I think if I built nothing else in my shop, again, it would be another bench.
When I was preparing for this, 35 years in the investment business, a teacher of financial literacy, All-American goalie at Princeton, I could have easily just jumped right into lacrosse and the finance side, but I wanted to start with woodworking because that's what people don't know about you. And I knew that there was something behind it. And we started off our podcast talking about a bench. And there's something beautiful about that, because the starters are not there. They're on the bench. And I guess I would just click one more time on it. What got you into woodworking, and what inspired you to stay with it?
Like so many things in my life, my father. And he had a little shop down in the basement, and he'd make things, and when he retired, he started making more things. And so that's where it started. Just watching him build things. I just always liked it. And then in high school, they used to have wood shop, my high school on Long Island. And I built a table there in high school. I'm not sure where it is now, but it went to college with me, and probably got sold off when I was in college. I have no idea where it is. That's how I got into it. And I've always admired it. I love, Instagram's been great because if you look at my Instagram feed, it's all woodworkers.
Really?
Yeah. Woodworkers and lacrosse.
Wow.
And, but you see these beautiful creations that are made using wood. And so it's always, I love it.
And you clicked on it, but Jesus Christ was a carpenter. And the beautiful thing about that is if the chair or the table is not solid and doesn't have integrity, it falls. And that's a big thing in our faith, understanding when we sin, when we miss the mark and we don't carve it correctly. I want to get your thoughts on this while we're on the topic. We often say really quickly, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is what I call upon before I give a speech. The Father is what I pray to, and as the ultimate judge and audience of one. And then the Son is this embodiment, and it's a huge thing I talk about in sport, because if you stay in your head, you're dead. If you play with your heart, it's a playful art. So how do you climb out of your head down here and play with the right amount of passion and emotion without becoming emotional? So I wanted to get your thoughts more on, playing with heart, because you always had this deep bond as a coach with your players, and it seems like you don't stay up in your head when you're coaching.
It's so emotional. It is in the heart, and you have to balance the two, to be honest, right? You have to, as a coach, you have to maintain your emotions. You can get caught up in the game and, attack the refs or scream at your players.
Yeah.
And you can get distracted pretty easily, but it's that bond that you form with your players, that's all from the heart. And that's what endures in the end, right? I mean, none of that other stuff endures. So when you talk about building something solid, that's why you coach. It's the relationships. It's your ability to have those relationships with the kids, and over time, it's not. It can be transactional if you want it to be, but I don't think you're going to get any success if you're transactional with your kids.
Yeah. We are deeply entrenched in the lacrosse world. And whenever somebody says Peter Cordrey to me, I said, oh, man of one of the highest integrities I've ever met. And that's the first thing that comes out of my mouth, because I do feel that. We talk about solid nature of a bench, and we talk about integrity. I believe integrity can be defined as that person is the same all the way up, all the way down. So when you're listening to music, you don't want it to be too chaotic and you don't want it to be too boring. But when the drums come in perfectly with the guitar, perfectly with the piano, and then the voice runs over it, and it's the same all the way, we're in flow when you're listening to music. Same with a person, right? They have that true authenticity about it. Maybe it's a click back to your father again. Where do you feel that integrity came from in your life?
Yeah, my parents. There's no question. That's instilled in you at an early age. Just solid people, really hardworking, kind, caring, but very disciplined. And my dad served for 30 years in the Navy, 18 reserves. But, my parents had 7 children, and you kind of had to have that order and that integrity.
Where were you in the order?
6th out of the 7.
What was that like?
It was great. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to be any other place, for a couple reasons. One, you learned a ton from, it's 6 boys. They had a girl, Laura, and then 6 boys. And you learn a lot from your brother's mistakes, right? And so, and they make a lot of them, and we all make a lot of them. And so that, it'd be a simple thing like smoking pot. Like they got in trouble from that with my father, and they turned around and said, if you ever smoke pot, we're going to beat the crap out of you. And that really stuck with me, like through it in one way it differentiated me in sports, and I wasn't ever tempted to violate that, because your brothers tell you that, and that's where you're going to be. But the birth order thing, 6 boys, you're going to get in a lot of battles, physical battles with your brothers. And so it was good that I wasn't the youngest, because at least I had somebody to turn around after I got beaten up to wrestle with my younger brother. So
it's fascinating, Coach. What comes to mind is I was thinking birth order before you brought it up. I'm only one of 2, the youngest, but then my mom's the youngest of 5. And my dad's the youngest of 3. So I have all these cousins who are much older than me, and I've been able to do the same thing that you've done. And there's something in psychology called the Darwinian niche hypothesis, and it talks about creativity of younger individuals because other niches are already taken. So when the young individual looks up, they're like, oh, wow, I can't be that because that's that person's niche, that person's niche. And there's a book called Born to Rebel that emphasizes this even more, how creativity is tied with being younger, because you're able to carve out your new creative niche. Do you feel like that was true about you, or you were more in line with your siblings and your parents and what they were doing?
It's probably, I think there's probably truth to that, because I look at my younger brother, I look at me, all of us are very different. And the rebel part is definitely more applicable to my younger brother. But for me, we all went in different places. Once we moved on from college, to my parents' credit, all 7 went to colleges. Most of them have advanced degrees and of their kids. But I mentioned my little brother, he basically was a rebel all along, went to college at the last moment that he had to, and ended up being starting his own software company. But he didn't, he had to beg the school to give him a computer degree on the last day of his graduation. So it's, to your theory, I think there is a lot to that. And you just see it. My brothers are all in different businesses. None of them are in the same business.
So staying chronological for a little bit, going from your childhood into your time at Princeton and then right into your early time in finance, if we can go inside, those 2 chapters, because I think it shines light on who you are today. Could you talk about your path to Princeton? Because there's young student athletes who will be listening to this as well. You talked about what you should stay away from, but what were some of the things that you felt like you were doing well, or you were really hitting with intention while you were going through your late middle school and high school years to get you to Princeton?
Again, I was blessed with a mother who, she just was very intellectual, loved to read. And, our house had a den that was filled with books, and that was awesome. So I loved to read. My father's business, when he was in the reserves, was delivering newspapers. He had a newspaper delivery service. So there'd be newspapers in our house all the time and magazines in our house all the time. I love to read, and still do today. But the Princeton path was kind of, I'm going to say it's almost serendipitous. And back in the 70s, for lacrosse recruiting, you probably weren't recruited until your senior year. And in the May preceding my senior year, we were up at Hobart College and watching the Division III finals. My brother had played at Washington College, and at halftime we go to the friendlies across the street, and we're with Bob Shriver, who's a legendary coach from Boys Latin, and my brother, they were line mates at Washington College, and we bump into Mike Hanna, who's the current head coach at Princeton. And we're walking away with our ice creams after we meet Coach Hanna. And my brother says to me, "You should go to Princeton." And my response to him was, "What's that?" And so I, 6 months later, I was on campus. And after I went to that campus, there was no other place I wanted to go to college.
Why is that?
It was nothing like I'd ever seen in my life. It was like being on a Hollywood set of like castles, and was really beautiful, and just had a wonderful time down there, as a prospective student. Didn't know if I would ever get in academically. I don't, if I couldn't stop a lacrosse ball, I wouldn't be going to Princeton. There's no question. And also, money-wise, my parents, with the 7 kids, we lived a great life, but they didn't have a lot of money to spend on tuition at the time. And it's funny, 10 years after I graduated, my mother told me a story about she took a trip once I had applied with my father to go to some outlet malls in Pennsylvania from Long Island. And they drove through Princeton on the way to Pennsylvania, and they stopped at a stoplight. My mother said she just started crying because she didn't think she could ever afford for me to go there. And I would have gone to West Point because I'd gotten accepted to West Point, and it's full ride, and everything would have been paid for. Sure. But the financial aid package when it came from Princeton was really good. And so that's where I ended up going.
And did it fulfill your expectations when you got there?
Yeah, it was great.
Awesome.
Loved it. You work really hard academically, and I learned a ton. And the team was great. We didn't have quite the success. We were always, I think, second in the league to Cornell, but we got better every year, and that's important to me.
What about your time personally when you were there? Was it early success, often success the whole time?
I was on the bench freshman year behind a senior captain, and then progressively got better. I started as a sophomore. I came to school, and he had recruited 3 goalies in our class. Now, it wasn't, in the days of IL where you could figure out who was in your class. You didn't know pretty much until you got to campus. So one of the other goalies was an All-American. The other one was the best goalie out of Landon. And I was freaking out when I got there. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'll ever play, because it's different with goalie. Like basically, there's the starter and there's the backups, and you're not running shifts at all. You're either, playing or not playing. So that was a little tough. And, obviously when my junior year, they brought in a great kid from Syracuse who eventually became a starter, but I had to fight for my position. And, so it was great. You learn so much playing a sport, and that applies to the rest of your life.
So something that we talked about before we got on here was this quote you use often, be humble, be hungry.
Yeah.
And you talked about the loving and kind nature of your upbringing. And then in that last response, you said, fight for the position. I'm often talking about how leaders disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And you got to be able to be generous and relentless and hardworking and cooperative, that kind of back and forth. Where did that hunger and fight come from, that part of you? Because it's opposite to being humble and integrous and not ruffling any feathers.
Yeah. Well, the be humble, be hungry, that first comes from John Gordon, and love it. I absolutely love the quote. The be humble, be hungry, and taking them separately. The hunger part, probably my upbringing, and you do, there's a chip on your shoulder, right? So I grew up in a town, Manhasset, where most of the parents were Wall Street or very successful parents. And my dad was very successful, well, out of measures, but he didn't own a suit, and we didn't go on vacations. We never went out to dinner, and that's fine. Our vacations were summer camping trips, which were awesome. But, so always sort of hungry to achieve success. And when you grow up with 5 brothers, it's competitive whenever you're playing sports. A lot of it was in the yard, pick up wiffle ball, basketball, football, whatever you were playing, you just, that sort of comes natural. And I didn't take losing very easily. I really, really disliked losing. In fact, my father actually thought I had anger issues about losing, and I had to sort of learn how to deal with that over time.
How did you learn?
I don't know how I learned over time. I think as you when you lose, you sort of you got to look back and, look at what your actions are in the wake of a loss and figure out if you're sane or not. And sometimes I just realize that, you've got to be able to control this better. And my high school program, we didn't lose a lot. We were very successful. So that's something I learned at Princeton. We got there. I think my freshman year we were 500, and I didn't like it. I didn't like losing games, and I think it got tempered over time. And probably what got tempered was my reaction to losing got tempered over time. I think I was able to try to harness it for better rather than just be angry.
I will always talk about I'd rather put harness or reins on a wild horse than look to kick a donkey and say, hey, come on, let's go. And there's, as long as you have that energy, then you can channel it. One of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to psychology and emotional channeling is, ever since you're a kid, they say to you, control your emotions. All you have to do is control your emotions. And you can't necessarily do that. So if I said, I really love your blue collared shirt right now, words give you an emotion, right? So how we speak channels, harness, and manages our emotions. So it's kind of that reins on a wild horse. And that's why we come back to the spoken word, and how we speak matters. And Muhammad Ali understood that, right? Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Hands can't hit what the eyes can't see. If you dream about being, you better wake up and apologize. I always say he had a talk coach named Bundini, which is an amazing little read, because he wanted Muhammad to speak like that until it came into existence. And I love how you're on the bench your freshman year and you finish as an All-American. Going right into your career on Wall Street, I'm sure you're lowest man on the totem pole again.
Right.
Can you talk about the strategy you used to wind up having a 3 decades plus career there? But the start of Wall Street is not always easy.
No, it's not. And I started actually in what's called investment banking, and I didn't like it. I worked incredibly hard. I thought it was sort of a boot camp for learning a lot. And remember, my dad didn't go to an office every day and didn't wear a suit. So just that cultural shift was tough for me. And but I learned a ton. And then I went back to graduate school and really, really liked the markets, really liked the action in the markets. So I came out and took a job with Merrill Lynch and on a trading desk. And you start on the bottom. You're trading what's called the short end of the curve, which is probably less opportunity to lose a lot of money. And then you just work your way up and if you're successful and your P&L is positive at the end of the year, you would move on. And if you weren't, they would have a pretty regular culling of personnel. And if you weren't making the mark, you were gone. And I like that, because that's pretty much what sports are. It's meritocracy. And so it's very black and white. And moved on, from Merrill. At some point, about 10 years on, I basically switched over to what's called the buy side, the investment side. So managing people's money as opposed to being a trader and a salesperson. And I did that for a lot of reasons. One, a big part of that was lifestyle. It's very demanding. I used to tell my wife that I didn't want to go out on Friday nights because I'd be so exhausted by the end of the week. I had the opportunity to go to work for Prudential Investment Management, which was in Newark, which was 20 minutes from my house. And I could run money for them, for their clients and their insurance company. And I took that job, and it was great. I had a boss I worked with him for 20 years, and he was fantastic. Very family friendly. I love the culture there. It was a very hardworking place, but people really valued their family lives. And so I loved every bit of that.
Before we get into the family side of things, you talked about working your way up. I'm very interested in clicking into that, because what gets you here won't get you there. in your early years when you were working your way up versus being on the buy side, were you using different strategies to work your way up, or were they the same mentalities, the same strategies, the same nuances to get you there?
I think, I mean, the basic strategy is really, work hard, make sure that you're treating others well, because I think that no matter where you are, that's a constant. And those two things were consistent. So I didn't change strategies a whole lot. It gets very objective on Wall Street in the sense of, you're either producing or you're not producing. And so you can move on from that pretty quickly if you're not producing. And so what skills do you need to produce? A lot of what you get in athletics, it's a competitive feel. It's knowing how to handle loss, right? And which I learned. It's waking up every day being really excited to go back in and bringing energy, to what you're doing and to the people around you. That matters, and luckily the culture that I worked at every place that at Merrill, at Prue, those things were valued as well. So that's important.
You talked about when you left Princeton and went to Wall Street, and then in that last answer right there, culture. It was a cultural shift. And I've seen you, and I think you would call yourself the same thing, culture builder, and how that's very important. Could you go into how you look at culture on building teams? So you've back-to-back state champion, coach for Benjamin High School. Now you're coaching at the collegiate level. Maybe there's difference there, but the foundational elements are probably the same. Could you share about how you look at culture?
Yeah. In any organization, any team, it's the most important thing you have. And what I believe is it stems from your core values, right? So your core values dictate what behaviors are acceptable in your organization. And over time, those behaviors need to become self-evident. So if you're building that in an organization, it's here's the things that we value. And for example, with Benjamin, it was selflessness, character, which is broad, but these are high school kids, so I'm okay with that. And then mental toughness. And, everything we did and all the behaviors that we rewarded or eliminated stemmed from that set of core values. And that'll create a culture over time. And you need to have culture carriers. You need to have leadership that simply repeats those messages. And so that the kids embrace them and they understand them, and then ultimately that they live them.
I know you said it's broad. I learned recently that the Latin root of the word character means engraved marks. So who somebody is all the time, not what they are here and there, but who they are all the time. Selflessness, character, and mental toughness. I remember you mentioning team before self was a big thing. And TBS was the Benjamin School.
Yeah.
Could you go there? Where did you come up with that idea?
I was, so when I took the job, I was away with Ellen, my wife, and I wanted to write a letter to the parents. And I'm like, I'm thinking about all those qualities, and I'm like, TBS, wow, that's easy. That's team before self. And it was a gift, thank you, God. And so that was something that, to this day, they're wearing on all of their shooter shirts and their sweatshirts. So it's TBS, team before self, and it's on the bottom of their, so you just repeat it. And that, that is selflessness, right? It's really, really hard, and it's almost countercultural, right? When you think about a teenage kid today, they're on Instagram, they're looking at the number of likes they got, they're whatever they're doing, TikTok, whatever, right? So it's countercultural for them to say it's not about you, it's about the team, right? And from a leadership standpoint, if you're a coach or you're a manager, you're always going to encounter issues that involve just the individual, right? And how do you frame those issues? You got to frame them in what's in the best interest of the team, what's in the best interest of the organization, and it makes it pretty simple, right? And so they get it after a while, because if they've done something that we don't want them to do, and I'm talking to them, and it'll be like, what do you think is in the best interest of the team? And they know, and so, and in an organization, when I was in a leadership role at Prudential, and there was a person that basically we had to remove from the firm, it was generally because it was always in the best interest of the organization. It's not an issue of what's best for that person. And sometimes it was best for that person, but not always, to be separated. And those are really, really difficult decisions to make. But, it makes it a lot easier when you frame it as, look, there's the team that I have to be concerned about. Flies in the parable that Jesus is go after the one sheep and at the expense of the 99. And that's a tough one. And I wrestle with that one a lot. But in the end, that's where I come back to. I just need to solve that issue.
I think that's at the heart of the conversation which I try to have on Grateful and Full of Greatness. There's things that make us wrestle.
Yeah.
As you were talking, for some reason, this book came to mind by Morgan Housel. It's called Same as Ever. And if I remember the story early on, Warren Buffett makes a joke. Do you know what the number one candy or chocolate bar decades ago? Somebody answers, Snickers. Do you know the number one now? Snickers. And there was this, the idea that some things don't change. And I'm very fascinated, so I want to go into with you what has changed about Peter Cordrey as he got older. We talked about tempering your anger, and I asked you a question about early Wall Street versus buy side. I know you're a deeply faith-filled man right now. Have you always been that? I mean, you just brought up Jesus going after the one lost sheep. Or is that something that evolved as you got older too?
That evolved. And, I'm a halfie. My father was a Protestant. My mother was a Catholic. And as I said, my dad would go to work every Sunday at 3 a.m, deliver newspapers. So by default, we were, raised Catholic, I think, my mother's religion. And when you're Catholic, about age 13 or 14, you go through confirmation. And we went to confirmation, and my mother, after we went to confirmation, would say, it's your choice. You want to go to church again, it's up to you at this point. You just made, your confirmation. And even though I said yes to my confirmation, I stopped going to Mass probably for about 13 years. And that was my venture into the wilderness. And at times it was pretty wild, to be honest with you. When you're single in New York, you're living a fairly licentious life, or you could. And at some point I just said, this is not what I want to do. This is not what I want to be. This is not what my life should be about. And so I was working with a guy on a trading desk who his name's Mark DeGennaro, and he brought me back to the faith. Just by the way he would go to Mass every week, and he would, and the way he conducted himself, and just the talks we would have with one another. And I started going to Mass again, probably when I was about 27, 28. And then from there, it's just deepened over time. There was a midday service I could go to in Newark that I'd try to go to occasionally, or whenever I could. Ellen and I raised the kids Catholic, and would, regularly going to church. And sometimes that was a conflict, because of sports and stuff, but we'd make church the priority. Even if they were traveling, we'd go to church. But I never felt that I left Jesus, right? And so even when I was in college, I'd pray for things. I'd have if I was having difficulty, I'd go into the chapel and pray. And Jesus doesn't leave you, you leave Jesus. And that's sort of where it was. So as I was, when I left the business, I got to teach as an adjunct at Seton Hall University, which is a Catholic school up in New Jersey. And, that was a great experience because they had a beautiful chapel right there on campus. And I got to go to Mass when I was teaching. And I thought a little bit about entering the diaconate, becoming a deacon, but that was pretty much on the age limit of where they were. And just in my discernment, I just, it didn't feel fully pulled into it. And it was there was on the other side, there was a clock ticking on there, but God leads you to where he wants you to be. And, so yeah, most of, my faith journey, it feels like it's on an accelerated pace right now. Like I just, I can't read enough of it. I can't think more about it. I can't get enough of it. It's been great. PBA is a great institution. It's given, we pray, at film, we pray before practice, we pray after practice. I've loved it.
The story that's hot in the news right now on the Live Tour, Anthony Kim, a golfer who finds early success, 12-year hiatus, is battling alcohol and addiction, and then comes back and has one of the most, it's a must-watch, his final round in Australia this past weekend. And I just thought about, redemption. I think as I've started to study different cultures, different religions, different in theologies and things like that, redemption keeps coming back, right? That you sin, you miss the mark, and then you redeem yourself. That's why we're so inspired watching him go on that run and things like that. I get this idea from Bob Davids. It's a great TED Talk. He talks about leadership without ego, and he separates the difference between management and leadership. Managers push people and leaders pull people. And kudos to Mark, if he ever listens to this, the guy who, by the way he lived, really invited you, welcomed, and becomed. That's what I say, is there's this invitation and a welcome to become, just like that. There's not this pushy nature. And I know Alan's had that big influence on you. So now I do want to go into family. You come from a big family, you have a beautiful family yourself. You have all these individual accolades, but I want to go back to your team at home. What influence has she had on your life? And maybe you could talk a little bit about your family.
There's the expression that behind every good man is a great woman. And Ellen has been not behind me so much as beside me, but probably truthfully ahead of me and pulled me along. She's one of 10 children. And I think she's fourth in the birth order. And, but she has been one of the, if not the greatest blessing in my life. She really does pull me along. She's great and incredibly smart, with a wicked sense of humor, and very, very difficult to ever have a fight with, because she will slay me in about 2 seconds. Something incredibly insightful and intelligent. I just can't match her on that. But she's been an incredible mother and foster mother. And, she, when we meet somebody and we met in a bar in New York City, and she was a really good attorney working at Cahill Gordon, which is a top Wall Street firm, working on a gigantic historic deal, the RJR Nabisco merger. And we set up for these Friday night dinners at 9:00, because, as I told you, I was so tired on Fridays. I'd want to go home, take a nap, and she'd work like a lawyer does in all hours. And so her break time was maybe 9. So we went out on about 4 dates for dinner, and she was probably an hour to an hour and a half late for each one of those. Now, this is not in the days of the cell phone, so she'll call the restaurant and tell her that she's going to be late, and after a while, I got used to it. So we stopped dating after those 4 dates and took a hiatus till about 8 months later, and somebody offered me tickets to a Georgetown, where she went to college, St. John's basketball game at the Garden, and I called her up, And I said, hey, I got tickets. And she, how are you? We haven't talked in a long time. I got tickets to this game. Would you want to go? And she says, she didn't say anything. And she goes, do you want a tuxedo? And I'm like, where did that question come from? And I go, yeah, I'd bought one at a thrift shop. And she goes, can you come to my firm's formal with me tomorrow night? And I'm like, yeah, I can go to your firm's formal tomorrow night, but you got to go to the basketball game with me on Sunday. And so that
Wow.
was,
That's amazing.
we got engaged about 6 months after that. And, our firstborn was about a year after that. So, she's been great. It's been an awesome journey, and it's 34 years now, at 35 in May. And, I'm looking forward to, something like your grandfather's, if I can do that.
That's amazing. You said this line, it's amazing. Jesus doesn't leave you, you leave Jesus. And I thought very similarly, you guys left each other, but you didn't leave each other. And then you had this comeback. You whispered there that you foster children. Oh, what made you take on that, right? That's more responsibility, but I imagine more meaning too.
You'd think it would have been a big discussion. It wasn't. It was sort of, we both wanted to do it. And we had 4 children. Emmett's our youngest, and when he was about 2 years old, and we were on this sort of 18-month cycle of 4 children, a child every 18 months. And she said, well, why don't we just start fostering? And so I loved the idea. And there was an organization at the time, started by a woman named Pat Chisholm in Short Hills, New Jersey, called Just Babies. And there had been a crack epidemic in Newark. And, these babies were in the maternity wards, and they were just in the wards, not held, not loved, not nurtured. And it makes biologically a tremendous difference in a person, that love, that being held, that nurturing. So you were getting I think at the time they used the term border babies. And the long-term results are disastrous, like low IQ, socioeconomic, or social problems that stem from that. And so Pat trained up foster parents specifically for that purpose, to take on those babies. And that's where we started. And over time, we moved to older children from the babies.
This is an analogy I've been using lately, whether it lands or not. Children are like wet cement that can be imprinted in different ways. And I almost jumped in front of you there to say the research couldn't be clearer on how important the first 2 to 4 years of the child's life is. And these core values, like you brought up earlier, they get synced in again. This is Morris Massey's work by 9 years old and then late teens, right? But by then you have the cement that's getting pretty hard. But it's amazing that they actually need to be touched, that they actually need to be held. In the book by Charles Dulwick, it was amazing. It just hit me right when he said it. He said, people want to be heard, helped, or hugged. That's all they want. And I just thought that was amazing, and what you can do when you hold people, especially at a young baby age.
It's more than that. We would get kids whose moms, and so we had roughly 35 foster children. There was never a father involved. And that itself is a tragedy. But we would get these children whose mothers were drug-addled. And so that the kid was born with that addiction, or, had those issues in them. And over time, we would hold them, and it was almost had the appearance of them being ice cubes. And they melted, and they were non-emotional when you first got them, but over the course of several weeks, you'd see them start to get emotional and smile, and it was God at work. It was unbelievable.
That is
it, and it's not, it was my wife and my kids. Like you talk about getting from giving, like watching my children deal with the kids was such a gift.
Yeah. And we get so caught up in other things as if they're more important. Meanwhile, that's that melting is really what it's all about. The number one thing that leads to criminality, especially for young men, is fatherlessness. And the only thing that's close to that, if not stronger, is crime goes up in an area where there's a relative difference in income in that zip code, right? So if somebody's really rich next to somebody who's really poor, that's the number one variable for criminality in a certain sector. But right behind that would be fatherlessness. So it's just amazing that you guys did that. I'm going to go towards taking the shade of the family life back into you being a coach, because you've used your experience and your wisdom being the next right thing to do, from Wall Street to being a teacher in financial literacy and being an exceptional, loving coach. One of the things that I've admired about you is you get out of the way. You get out of the way. You don't feel the need to always be talking, to always be saying. In fact, you empower other people. Could you talk about that?
I think it's so critical. Like, what is your job as a leader? It's to bring others and serve others and bring others up. And, you can sit there on the podium all the time. When you're creating a team or staff, business-wise, your job is to get out of the way eventually. If you're truly serving others, then you're bringing them to a place where they shine. And luckily, in a lot of my situations, I've had great talent, and part of your job as a leader is to steer them where things are going well, and then correct them when things are not going well. And that's hard to do at times. I mean, it's one of the great qualities of my wife. I mean, she is my best critic by far. And, but you have to do that as a leader. And so I take Benjamin again, you have Duncan and you have Rob, and Rob in his own right is a leader and really accomplished lacrosse coach. And Duncan is a younger guy, but he's now running the program. And I said to the parents for years, I had no qualms with Duncan running the program, and there he is today, running it. And so, that's, whether, and I look back at my P gym, just bringing people up, and I love organizations where that growth is organic, because it sort of confirms, and we had a tremendous amount of organic growth at Pru, rarely going to the outside. So, but that tells you, right, that your work is confirmed and you're doing the right thing and getting out of the way.
Ego comes from Latin meaning I. So I get in the way when we lead with ego. And I like the Alcoholics Anonymous version of talking about ego. They say edging God out. That's what it stands for, edging God out, EGO. And that's who really should be at the center of it. When you talk about empowering, I thought about Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, in a way that an individual can sharpen another individual. And you talked about Ellen being your greatest critic in that. And one of the things that I found fascinating, right, when I met you and you brought me in to be the mental coach for your team at Benjamin, you talked about complacency and manufacturing adversity. And you're sitting there like, what? That's not a loving thing to do, but it actually is. It actually is, because when you have this pie in the sky mentality and you get too high on your horse, you will fall off like St. Paul. So could you talk about manufacturing adversity?
Yeah. So, the most influential book I ever read, and I read it when I was 26 coming out of business school, was The Road Less Traveled by Dr. Scott Peck. And the book starts out with the line, life is difficult. It's pretty simple. Once you embrace that notion, once you understand that and accept it, things become easier. That's hard to, when you think about if you come from very good circumstances as a child, meaning your family's done well, you're in a loving environment, you're probably not experiencing adversity to the extent that other people are experiencing it. So this idea of manufacturing adversity, it is in line with the mental toughness. Life is hard, right? You're going to fail. Sports is the best laboratory for that, right? It happens daily in practice. Kids fail. You didn't hit the mark, but how we recover from that failure, how we accept it, how we deal with it. Do we deny it? Do we say, Coach, that wasn't me? No. Own it, own it. So, I mean, yeah, I think all coaches, if they're effective, are going to be hard on their kids. Read a great recently, the chaplain for the Notre Dame football team wrote a book, Pray Like a Champion. It's a takeoff on Play Like a Champion, which is up there, the sign up in their locker room. The third chapter is called Choose Hard. It's their offensive linemen. They wear these T-shirts that say Choose Hard. And that's what life is. Life is hard, right? And so, we need to choose hard. It's easy to choose easy, right? Choosing hard, I think it's just more rewarding. I think it prepares you for the reality of life better if you're a young athlete. And it's hard to do. I go back to that book, just because so many want to take the easy route, and it's, you could take the easy route. Sure, you could, but you're not preparing yourself for life. And one of the most important things I do as a coach of young men is I have to prepare them for life, right? And protection and preparation are opposite sides of the coin. Parents, because they love their children so much, right? And you see that in them when they're around their kids. Their natural inclination is to protect, is to pillow the kid. You got to be careful. The more you protect them, the less you prepare them for life. And so that's a fine line, because do they trust in a coach enough to prepare their kids? Because I can't always protect them. I'm not going to be around. But the judge of a good coach, of a high school coach, would be you get your scorecard 40 years later. It's not the championships we won in 24 and 25. It's what last year's 11 seniors are doing 40 years from now.
That's amazing. I often say on the strength and conditioning side, you can have periodization of workouts that help you 100 days from now. And I often talk about mental performance training as the 10,000 day game, or maybe even longer. So I love how you said that. And you brought up Pray Like a Champion, and there's connection there with Choose Hard. I thought about Gina Auriemma and the women's basketball at UConn. He says, choose your hard. And you get to choose your hard in life, right? There's a cool idea that it's not quitting when you choose an equal or harder mountain, right? You're just transitioning then, right? But if you totally stop and don't choose another mountain to go up, then it is quitting, right? But it's not quitting if you choose an equal or harder mountain. And the line for child psychology is you want to prepare the child for the road. You don't want to prepare the road for the child. And the brain wants to do two things. It wants to predict and protect. So that is the natural inclination, just like you talked about. And on my last podcast episode, I should have given you more credit because you're the one who introduced the road less traveled. And I actually shared a long quote from it. And the one that I didn't share, which I wish I did, is this small line that says, you can only lead insofar as you go before.
Yeah.
And there's just amazing, be a product of the product, live it, have the humility to say that, what I do not know is more important than what I do know. And then go ahead in front, and be willing to pull along. As you go into college coaching now, what are you seeing as difference? You had success at the high school level. It took you years to build that culture, if you want to talk about that for a second. And what are you seeing now as difference now that you're at the college level?
The college level, these are kids trying to figure out their next steps, where they're not going to be living at home. And so obviously the high school kids are all concerned about college as the next step, and these guys are real life as the next step, so to speak, if you look at college that way. But and they, they're recruited for the most part, these kids, right? So they love the sport, they love the passion. For me, and my role is a little different now. I'm not the head coach; I'm an assistant, and so I do I do a lot of mental talks with the kids. Probably, not so much X's and O's, although I'm involved in that where I need to be, and or where I'm asked to be, and I'm more about the kids' mental framing.
Mm.
I mean, it's a tremendous joy to be out there every day with those guys, and I just look for opportunities to help them enjoy that. Just either it's props or it's talking to them on the side or letting them know I saw that good play you just made. It's that sort of just trying to really enhance their experience and make us a better team.
You talk about the talks. I know you've had some epic halftime speeches in your past. One piece of advice for a college or high school coach that's listening to this right now, maybe their team is going through some adversity. They thought they've been preparing their team well, and now they're kind of in this middle ground purgatory trying to figure out how are we going to get better and find wins later on in the season because we're in the middle of the lacrosse season right now. What's one piece of advice that you would give to a high school or college coach that's listening, going off the thread that we've been talking about? When do you go in there and say something versus get out of the way?
Less is better. Less is better. Keep it simple. One of the things we did that I think I still look at it is, these kids work incredibly hard. Whatever sport at the college level, they devote a ton of time to it. And I do worry, that it's too one-sided, it's too lopsided. And I think as coaches, sometimes they just need to pull back on that and let the kids have some more free time or more spacing between lacrosse and the rest of their lives, because they have so much going on in their brains, and it doesn't mean they don't want to win. They do want to win. I think one of the things we did at Benjamin in the end, in the last 2 years on the cycle, was we cut out a lot of time. We just gave them days off, like 3 in a row, 2 in a row, where I probably never would have done that, at the start. But it really is I think, worth doing. I think it really benefited the kids and the team.
The word paradise means walled garden. One of the things I talk to a lot of coaches about is creating a playground. And it might sound like a silly thing, but you're not hundreds of miles of wilderness where they can just go that much freedom, but also not a prison yard, right? So you want a kind of a playground where different personalities can flourish and they can play within a structure that you provide them for. What do you think about that?
I love it. I love that idea. When you first said it, a house that we live in has a courtyard, and to me, it's got all these beautiful flowers and bougainvillea in it, and a nice table in the middle and palm trees, and it's like paradise. And I can imagine my team being inside of that and having fun, as you described. And I think that is key. Like, if you're not out there having fun, if you're not laughing, even in the face of failure, like you've got to have that for it to be sustaining and successful.
Based on that, what came to my mind is, in order to get to heaven, you must return to that of a child. It's an amazing line in the Bible. Yeah. You talked about earlier, your faith is being accelerated right now, something along those lines. So I want to click back to that one more time. I was fortunate enough to meet you beforehand, but also really meet you through Lumen, a Catholic men's leadership group down here in Florida. Lumen meaning light, and being that light in other people's lives. What did you mean earlier when you said, I feel like this chapter or this section of my life, my faith's very accelerated?
Well, so I am now working. I would call, for lack of a better term, as the interim head of school at Carver Christian Academy here in West Palm. I am coaching at PBA. Those are both Christian organizations. But it's, that's an application more than it is. I listen to podcasts on Bible study. I'm gone to Bible study. I'm in Lumen, which is men getting together, leaders getting together and talking about faith and issues of character. It's been fascinating, and things that come back, like I'm just so focused right now on the word humility and the word wisdom and the connection between the two. And, stuff like that. I just, and I'll take that. And, one of my tasks at PBA is Wisdom Wednesdays. So I speak to the team for an hour before practice on wisdom. And it's funny, you had mentioned Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron. That's at the top of our sort of wooden pyramid.
Oh, wow.
And on the base is everyone eats. It's effort, attitude, toughness, and selflessness.
Oh, wow.
And then on the next layer up, we talk about sweep the sheds, be a pro, and protect the family. And at the top is iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
So we're going through the pyramid in each week, different blocks of that pyramid. It's been awesome.
I talk to my individual clients about this a lot, and I think this will be helpful for someone listening, trying to figure out what's the proper amount of structure to provide in your life. And I've always talked about it as you could be a glass of water, a bucket of water, a bathtub, all the way out to a pond, a lake, or an ocean, right? And maybe sometimes, I know Dr. Jerry Lynch would point to this, that life's like a river, right? It gets tight and everything speeds up, and then it opens up and everything slows down. And I share that because some people are more oceanic, right? These people that are spontaneous and very go with the flow and adaptable and flexible. These are your ICU nurses, firefighters, special forces called to go overseas at the last moment. And then there are people who are very structured and very punctual and on time. And some people would say more rigid, but also able to get the matters settled. So I think it's very important to find out what works for you inside that playground. I know, like, I'm always almost thinking about it out loud because I asked you this question, what advice you would give to coaches, but sometimes you're squeezing the water too tight and things are spilling over, and sometimes there's not enough structure or manufactured adversity.
It's a balance. It's like everything else, right? And so, in that river analogy that you're using, there are multiple parts of that river that you described, right? And there's so many different styles of coaching. There isn't one, but you got to come back to a keel, right? And you got to come back to something that centers you all the time. And for me, it's always been, even when I mentioned before, when I left the church, it's always, the keel is always, I had days on Wall Street where I was down a lot of money, trading. And there's only one place to turn. It's always to Christ, and there's probably, I think I would love for that to be the case for most of the coaches, that is, if you want humility, if you want the real wisdom, that's where it is, so wherever you are in that flow of water, I hope your boat has that keel.
I would be remiss if we didn't talk about it. You talked about there's been times where you were down a lot of money. It's from my perspective, experientially, that being humble comes from being very hurt and being like, well, I can't do this by myself. Like, I thought I could do it by myself, but I can't do it by myself. And do you mind pointing to one or two deep adversities or hardships that you had to go through that really maybe pulled you deeper into this word, humility?
Well, in a general sense, and you can go back to that episode. It was historic because there was a guy named Joe Jett on Wall Street who was, a Kidder Peabody, and he was stealing money from the firm, but he was also distorting the market that I traded wildly, so that he was provoking losses in other people's accounts by his bad actions, and I was the beneficiary, I guess, of that. And so, and it was in the same week when Ellen was pregnant with our second child, and the doctors were saying that she was going to have birth defects. So it was really a hard week, and I can remember that Saturday morning being in the fetal position on the floor of my den of my house in Summit, New Jersey, and just crying out to God, like, please. It was tough, and because one, I didn't know at the time that Joe Jet was causing all the disruption. So the markets will humble you, right? That'll humble you. And God humbles us all the time, right? And so there's one way out of that, and that's prayer and faith.
The only way out is all the way in.
Yeah.
I want to share one thing that I was listening to this week. It is by Dr. Jordan Peterson. He was sharing a message about the Abrahamic stories from the Old Testament. And the quote that he said was, "Nothing I've ever done was wasted. By done, I mean put my heart and soul into it. Attempted with all my effort. That always worked. It didn't always work the way I expected it to work. That's a whole different issue. But the payoff from it was always positive. Something of value always accrued to me when I made the sacrifices necessary to do something worthwhile. Go out and do things."
So I give in my financial literacy course at Benjamin, my good friend Chris Southard said,
Suds.
on the eve of my last class, the first year I taught it, said, "What are you going to do for class tomorrow?" And I said, I don't know. It's last class, probably just dismiss them early. He goes, no. You have to speak to them like you're on your deathbed talking to your children. I was like, Suds, that's really deep. And so I proceeded to write up a last lecture for them. And the lecture is entitled, Serve Others, Have Faith, and Run a Marathon. And we've talked about serving others a lot because I think that's the key to your success in life. To have faith, I mean it as a sort of double entendre. One, you should be an optimist because optimists have better outcomes in life, no question. They do studies, but have faith in God or a higher power if you have to. I can't tell them exactly where to go with that at that school, but I do share with them that Jesus Christ is my Savior, and that's the source of my faith, right? And that has been a keel in my life that balances me. And then run a marathon, and people are like, how does that relate to that? But that's all about process and endurance and perseverance. And whether you have a team, you can't control outcomes, you can control process. And that's been a theme in my life. But the marathon life, right? We're still running. We all run marathons.
Yeah.
And I actually ran a marathon once in 91 and the New York City Marathon. And that's a beautiful marathon to run because, every borough has its own story, right? And you learn so much training for a marathon and completing a marathon. And I crossed the finish line and I started crying. And I'm like, man, I didn't expect that to happen. I just started crying. Ellen was in front of me. She was pregnant with our first child. And, just completing, I think I ran it and I wanted to hit 4 minutes. I ran it in 4:08, but I didn't care. I was like, just getting through the last couple miles was really a struggle. And I finished and just seeing her, you started crying. I started crying and I didn't expect it. And it's just such an unbelievable feeling of joy, and I don't know if that's a taste of what getting into heaven will be like. And I'm sure it is a little bit. And, but that's what our lives are. It's a marathon. You just got to keep running.
Serve others, have faith, run a marathon. In 2017, I've only run one marathon as well. It was in New York City. I felt the same way about it. The boroughs are nuts. The 59th Street Bridge is something else. I felt the same way you did when I crossed the marathon. the reason I bring that up is because I understand viscerally how much it built capacity in me. Right, I used to think when I was in high school and they made us do like a mile run to warm up at gym class, I was a lot, and I didn't like that. And then you run something like that, and you are stretching your capacity. And I know really big men, like 6'6", 240 pounds, that are more rowboats, and I know very under 5 feet tall women who are battleships, and they just have capacity. They have a capacity to do hard things. The hardships they've been through has built a harder ship. And that's really what I take away. I love that deathbed, and that is deep. Are you kidding me? The thought that came to mind as you were saying that, and I believe the book is behind me. It's called Key Person of Influence, and it was written by a guy named Daniel Priestley, who talks about when you give a good pitch, it should follow capstone. And I can go through all the letters, C-A-P, but E, how you should leave them is with an essence of emotion. You shouldn't leave them and I'm done with my talk, goodbye, right? Or I'm done, thanks. It should be, do you also believe that you could do hard things in this world? That's a different way of ending a speech, right? And I think when you ask the right questions in life, it sends them on a quest. So with a final question that I want to ask you is, I came in here, I have all these things that I wanted to talk to you about, but I also wanted to leave it open-ended here at the end. Is there something that you wish that I asked you, or that we didn't get to, but through our relationship, you know we should be talking about it right now?
It might be it'd be about just you and what's driving you to do what you do.
Oh, wow. I know the first thing that comes to mind is I get made fun of a lot, that a lot of my really good friends are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. I just feel like going off the thread of humility and wisdom, those things are very important to me as well. And I feel as if the traumas or the tough things that I've been through in life, especially those that listen to this podcast at 18 years old with a broken back and my mom going through cancer, I didn't realize until I was deeply in the space of mental performance training, when I see bulging eyes, and not everybody's into what I'm speaking about, but there are like at least one person in the room that I know the message is for. I gave this speech at high school the other day, and a girl comes up very timidly afterwards and didn't even want to tell me about it.
Yeah.
She said, I came back from an ACL and I went back out into the field and attempt to give my all, and I was the worst player there. And I'm playing at the next level. I just didn't remember how to play anymore. And I went back before our second game into my car, and I found my notebook from the first time you gave a presentation, and for 30 minutes just went through that. And then I ended up being MVP of the tournament the rest of the time there. And I mean, you tell me, Coach, is there anything better than hearing that? Because it's not about anything other than I feel like I went through some things in my life to be able to share to other people.
Yeah.
And I sometimes get caught up that, it's not touching enough people or something like that. And then a young girl timidly does that. So I would say that's what's driving me.
Awesome.
Coach.
I feel the same way. I love getting that kind of feedback from a player. It's fantastic. It's what makes life worthwhile.
And I know you've been a long time listener of this, but I couldn't wait to have you on, because grateful and full of greatness. You're one of the most grateful people. You are so full of greatness because you've done it in multiple different fields. I'll finish by saying John Piaget had this idea that we live inside of a game whether we want to or not. And the whole essence is to win a game and then start another game with the skill set that we learned from a prior game. And you did it from Princeton to 35 years on Wall Street, to coaching, to teaching, to being ahead of the school. And I just admire that so much. I admire you. I meant what I said earlier in the fact that you're the highest integrity guy. And I really love that you're so technically sound with your head, like very smart, very bright and intelligent, but somehow, some way you always climb back down and you love your players. And I was never one of your players, but I do feel a lot that I have that, I see you as a coach in my life as well. So I just want to publicly appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you were one of my players, that's for sure. You know that, but thank you for having me. It's been a treat.
Awesome.
Thank you, brother.
What was it like for you to be a guest on Grateful and Full of Greatness?
This is new. I've never done this before, and I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was like I was actually at some point I just thought we were sitting around having coffee, and so it was great. And it's hard because I don't like to talk about myself a whole lot, and I had to think back to some things in my life that I haven't really talked about in a long time, and but I enjoyed it, and to the extent that it inspires others, I think it will be successful.
Today, I got to sit down with an amazing man, Peter Cordrey. Over 35 years in the investment business, a graduate of Princeton University, where he was an All-American goalie for those who love lacrosse. And today, we got to talk about his arc, his journey, the biggest influences in his life, things that moved him to tears. And I think this is a great episode if anyone out there is at a transition in their life, looking to take what they've learned from one chapter into the next. Coach Cordray, and I say coach intentionally, has been not only a businessman on Wall Street, an executive, a leader, he's also a teacher and a coach and a deeply faith-filled man. I hope you enjoy this episode. I certainly did. Take care.